Hello class, welcome to today's reading review video on the writing assignment number 8 topics, which is composing an argument based on a definition. And technically, this is called an extended definition essay. So what you're doing for this paper is you're going beyond the traditional dictionary definition of the term, the denotation, and you're examining the different connotations of the term to make an argument. So think of the topic of this next essay, the issue that you're focusing on is the abstract term that you choose from the list on page 117. Now, please remember the word abstract, if you look it up, means difficult to understand. So the question at issue for each of these terms, because the term becomes your issue for this paper, right? Your issue, if you would, for essay number 1 was joy, right? Was it literal joy? Was it ironic joy? Was it metaphorical joy? Or was it symbolic joy that killed Mrs. Mallard? Because if you look up in the dictionary, joy means happiness. But that word joy at the end was rather abstract, if you ask me. Your issue for your second paper, whatever the theme or idea was that you wanted to focus on in your poem, right? And usually those are considered abstract. I mean, we don't 100% agree on the definitions of certain concepts and ideas. That's why people write about them. That's why people write poems about love to explain what love is, and write poems about sadness and things of that nature. So for this essay, you can choose whatever stories, poems, fictional characters from plays, novels, as long as it's written. Hold off on any sort of movies or TV shows until essay number 4. So you could pick any number of. You can do a short story, a character from a short story, and compare them with a speaker of a poem, or contrast them with a character from a play. There's no limit on the fictional sources. But the key here is that you want to make sure that you understand what your question at issue is, and then how are you going to answer that question at issue in your thesis and prove it by analyzing the fictional sources, right? And essentially think of this as a character analysis. You're either going to be analyzing speakers or listeners in poems, right? Narrators or characters in stories or plays, right? And look at the decisions the characters or the speakers make and ask yourself, are they acting logically, or could they better use critical thinking skills to make more informed and logical decisions? Think about page 60 in the book. Philosophical counseling. That's one of the most important ideas in this book. A new kind of therapy called philosophical counseling is based on the belief that many personal problems stem from faulty logic, from irrational assumptions. And that Elliot D. Cohen teaches his clients critical thinking skills so they can identify and correct such damaging assumptions. I mean, in some ways, isn't the study of psychology rooted in critical thinking strategies? Perhaps. Nevertheless, let's go through this word by word. What are the different questions at issues that you should focus on in your paper? And remember, abstract means difficult to understand. So what's difficult to understand about, number 1, addiction? Well, we all agree on what a physical addiction is, but a psychological addiction or an emotional addiction or an addiction to another person, otherwise known as codependence, we don't necessarily agree on how to deal with that. So you might write about a character being codependent. I don't know, is maybe Macbeth codependent on Lady Macbeth's approval? Is maybe Claudius codependent on Gertrude? Remember when he's kneeling, he says, that cannot be. I can't be forgiven because I'm still guilty of the 3 things why I did the murder: my crown, my known ambition, and my queen. Wait a minute, are characters addicted to ambition? There you go. Alcoholism. Now, this is a tough one. If We all agree that alcoholism is a physical, chemical thing. You're not going to write your paper on that. What you would write your paper on is how could alcoholism, just like addiction, how could these both be overcome with critical thinking skills? By avoiding hubris, by using Occam's razor, by avoiding hidden and irrational assumptions, looking at counter arguments and using concession and refutation to achieve the dialectic, using Rogerian strategy, right? Because again, what's abstract about these terms, right? Um, what's all the fuss about? So you might look at characters in literature who might be addicted to ambition or power or another person, and you might say by using critical thinking skills they can make more logical decisions. You might look at characters in stories, poems, or plays that are demonstrating dependence or addiction to alcohol, and you might look at the negative effects of their drinking and how they can better use critical thinking skills to avoid making the same decisions and uh, cure, if you would, their addiction, their alcoholism. Um, art. I mean, what really is art? How do we define it? Is it something that reflects the human experience? Okay, because it's difficult to understand. So you might pick a work of art, aka a poem, a play, a story, and make a point about how, right, art is anything that teaches us about life that we can learn about the human experience from. Or you might take the word art and write about it from a therapeutic standpoint. You might look at art therapy. Again, you have a lot of freedom, but the word needs to be the basis uh, for the analysis. So essentially, what constitutes a work of art, and then you can go through those criteria to better understand, right, how we can classify a poem, a story, a play, something like that, as a work of art. Cool. Again, we're not talking about temperature here. We're talking about the idea, right, of a state of mind. There's poems written on this. There's stories written on this. I believe there's an actual poem called Cool. Um, again, is keeping your cool just being logical and not letting pathos, right, using logos and not letting pathos or illogical emotions overtake logic, right? Again, when one gets angry and one loses their cool, usually people do not make logical decisions because when we're at heightened states of emotion, really happy, really sad, really angry, usually, right, that heightened state of emotion may cause one to make an illogical decision. Courage. Normally it's a good thing, right? But can courage be illogical? I think so, right? You go running into a burning building to save someone and you're not a fire person, you don't have a fire suit on and you die. Is that courageous or is that illogical? Again, we don't need to debate that hypothetical example. But my point is, you could say that courage, when used logically, right, is a good thing. But when people let their courage be fueled by illogical emotions, otherwise known as hubris, notice how I keep coming back to hubris, it can have disastrous consequences. Is Macbeth courageous for killing Duncan? Yeah, but that's illogical courage. Is Claudius courageous to murder his brother in the garden, marry his wife, and usurp the throne from Hamlet? Yes, that takes a certain amount of chutzpah, right? A certain amount of guts, a certain amount of gumption, a certain amount of gall, a certain amount of courage, but it's a illogical courage. Defeat. Normally, a defeat's a bad thing. Could you use critical thinking skills to learn from a defeat, to grow from it, and could it be an educational experience? Could a defeat actually be a good thing, right? So you again would pick characters who were defeated and who overused critical thinking and logic to overcome that. And you may say, well, you keep coming back to critical thinking and logical skills. Again, use the ideas in this book. You can quote this book as a source. I mentioned it earlier, right? Avoiding hidden assumptions, avoiding illogical assumptions, using Occam's razor, Rogerian strategy, engaging in the dialectic, making concessions, right? All of the strategies in this book, philosophical counseling. You can quote from this book and use those strategies as a source in your paper as you're analyzing your characters. Depression, Normally, depression is considered a negative thing, right? But let's flip it. Doesn't it just mean you care? I mean, again, yes, somebody's sad, but is it beyond the sadness of logical reasoning? It's very interesting when you look up the term depression on dictionary.com. As the strategies on page 118 tell you, you should start with the dictionary definition of your term and then go beyond it. What's interesting, I believe depression says it's an amount of sadness not warranted by logical reason, is what it says on dictionary.com. Feel free to compare the different dictionary definitions. The Google definition, which is kind of most basic, dictionary.com, which is a little bit more involved. Then when you get to Merriam-Webster, there's more examples, right? If we go in the levels of specificity of dictionaries, right? Google's super basic, then dictionary.com, then Merriam-Webster.com. And then the most academic of all of them is the Oxford English Dictionary, which again, the bullet list on page 118 suggests you consult with. And that is available on the library database list. Just go to databases by alphabetized and click on O for Oxford English Dictionary. I suggest you consult with all four dictionaries. Why not bring in and compare and contrast them? You don't have to cite all the dictionary definitions. That'll help you get a better understanding of how the term is abstract and how you can move beyond that. Um, Education, normally a good thing, but could it be a bad thing if people use it illogically? I think so. Gossip, this is interesting, right? Gossip is normally thought of as a negative, but could it be the beginning of making an inference, right? Why do we call it gossip? Why don't we call it an inference? Again, could gossip be a positive thing if people use it logically and then use it as a starting point and get facts and premises to validate that gossip and turn it into a reliable inference? Um, Heroism, normally a good thing, just like courage, but are there illogical heroes that actually do illogical things? Absolutely, right? Again, it all comes down to worldview and the definition of a hero. Then we have the idea of an anti-hero, things of that nature. So the first column, our discussion is completed. I'm going to stop the video. Stay tuned. I'm going to do the exact same thing with the second column. Um, and thank you for your patience. And this is definitely one of those papers where if you have questions, the easiest thing to do is to call me so that we can actually have a conversation. I'd be happy to make suggestions about fictional sources for you. To get back to gossip, um, you know, again, what does Horatio say in the beginning of Hamlet? When they're saying, "Why are we on watch?" He says, "As the whisper goes," right? I mean, is the word whisper back then, was that just a synonym for gossip? So you could see that in Shakespeare. I think I've definitely looked at a bunch of these ideas. You could look at Hamlet's depression. You could look at how Hamlet educates himself by putting on the antic disposition, but then his hubris takes over once he has the knowledge that Claudius is guilty and fuels his illogical behavior. Um, again, like I said, please do not hesitate to contact me if you want to discuss this paper topic further. And stay tuned. More to come on the second half of the list. Thank you for your attention and your patience.